Hey friends, I just wanted to share this really nice article. I'll put the link to it in the description by Richard Schwartz, who is the creator of Internal Family Systems, and it's called Depathologizing the Borderline Client. And borderline is referring to borderline personality disorder, which is a diagnosis that is given to folks who often have um, had really traumatic childhoods or who have had a really like inconsistent or what would you say, contradictory caregivers who are like sometimes loving and sometimes not. And it has a lot of stigma around it. It's, I would say, maybe a little bit less than it was when I was given the diagnosis 20 years ago. I was diagnosed with borderline in 2020. 2020? Yeah, I think so. I have it tattooed on my, no, 2020. That was a few years ago, 20 years ago. I'm glad I checked my tattoo. 2002. I got the two and the zero right. They were just flipped. 2002 when I was 22 years old. That was where the 20 was coming in. So, anyways, I happen to have been in the hospital, psych hospital, after an overdose. And um, while I was still unconscious, I was given the diagnosis of borderline, and it is not terribly uncommon for people to be diagnosed with borderline if they're assigned female at birth and they're having relationship conflicts, and then they have any kind of self-harm or suicidality. Those can be some sort of catch-all ways that people end up with a diagnosis. But anyways, over the past 20 years have explored a lot of different therapies and modalities and life, and I ended up in dialectical behavioral therapy, which is was created by someone who had been given a diagnosis of borderline, Marsha Linehan, specifically for people who had been given a diagnosis of borderline. And I specifically use that phrase, like, have been given a diagnosis, because I don't see it as a pathology. I see it as a set of um, characteristics that have emerged for a really good reason. And I have been learning about internal family systems, and I was like, you know what? I wonder if Dick ever put anything together. Richard Schwartz, he goes by Dick, specifically for borderline, because as far as I know, really when you look within the like therapeutic counseling community and you say like what works for people who have been given the diagnosis of borderline, you'll pretty much 100% of the time get DBT, or you'll get like nothing, right? There's a big stigma that like there are some therapists who won't even work with someone who has a borderline diagnosis. And and I've been doing some trainings with IFS, and following some IFS people and reading books and stuff, and I hadn't seen anything specific around borderline. And so I was like, I wonder if he has written anything about this. And sure enough, I found this beautiful article. So I encourage you to read the whole thing, but I just wanted to share a part of it. I also will link in the description. I've made a video, like sort of side by side, going through a list of characteristics of borderline with high masking autism that I received from a psychologist during my informal autism evaluation. And I think that that's another interesting part to consider here, is that there are some folks that end up with a borderline diagnosis who could be more accurately described as autistic, especially assigned female at birth folks, because it is like 95% or something of people who receive borderline diagnosis are assigned female at birth, and it's like very, very, it's more and more, but historically less common for people assigned female at birth to get diagnosed autism. So some of the behaviors that are a little bit more autistic are more accepted in people assigned male at birth and more pathologized in people assigned female at birth. So that's sort of a whole nother conversation, and I'll put the link to that video in the description if you're interested in that. Okay, so a few things about this article. So I just love how he describes this. I'm going to go ahead and just read it because, and then I may pause and comment, but I think he puts it really well. So he describes in the part above sort of like how therapists and folks with a diagnosis of borderline can have like really either like the client is obsessed with the therapist or they're like hating the therapist or like invading privacy or, threatening to hurt themselves. It can be like a pretty dramatic relationship. And the sort of standard counseling world would say to like, try to control the self-harm, try to put really firm boundary. And he talks about how that actually is like makes makes it like holds people back from actually resolving some of these patterns. It's like an harmful to the goals of the client to try to do more of these like strict, rigid things that traditional psychology has recommended. And so he's kind of offering and talking through how it would be approached from an IFS perspective, recognizing those characteristics or symptoms or behaviors that have been called borderline as the emergence of different parts that are protectors that are trying to help us following terrible traumas or betrayals in childhood. So the central task is to work with those parts in a way that allows the client's undamaged core self to emerge. That's sort of like the like who we are before we had these traumas. And in I like how Buddhist philosophy offers it, it's like the original face, who you were before your parents were born. So sort of before your own personal or even generational trauma. What's that who is that that has this like unconditional acceptance of yourself and sees your own value. Okay, so we're looking at he gives the example of someone who had experienced sexual abuse as a child and that they had these parts that felt really upset but not safe enough to tell the other parent. And so the young, desperate, scared part, when they surface to your conscious, you're pulled back into those dreadful times. This cycle raises the same terrible memories, emotions, and sensations that you swore decades ago never to think about again. So these parts are your exiles because you try to keep them banished and locked away deep inside. However, when not actively hurting, these parts are sensitive, trusting, playful, and imaginative. So suppressing them stifles some of your capacities for love and creativity. And I really like this piece because a lot of times when we're talking about parts, we're talking only about the behavior that we don't like. And we don't acknowledge that these parts also have a lot of beautiful behaviors that we may really want in our life. So let's say, I have a infant exile who has a 3-year-old protector, and the infant has some really nice behaviors of self advocacy. Like the infant can cry when they're hungry, they can go ahead and sleep when they're tired, and they go to the bathroom right when they feel like they need to. But because that infant, you know, got us in trouble when they did those things, that protector has sort of like shut them off from being able to access those things as well as all the other things. And so those really important, beautiful life uh, practical life skills of feeding myself and resting myself and um, self advocating when I need something have also been stifled and they're harder to access because of that. 3-year-old's like, nope. And I would imagine also like the like easy trust that babies have for like smiling easily at anyone or just like opening their hearts to anyone, that probably has been impacted too, right? So, much of the time, these exiles remain hidden. They're kept buried by protective parts, which use various strategies to prevent you from experiencing them. One strategy is to prevent the exiles from being triggered in the first place. These protectors organize your life so you avoid anyone who reminds you of the stepfather, in this case, abuser, um, and remain at a safe distance from people in general. They constantly scold you, force you to strive for protection to keep you from being criticized or rejected, which would bring up the feelings of shame, fear, and worthlessness carried by the exiles. Despite these protective efforts, however, not only does the world still manage to trigger your exiles, but the exiles themselves want to break out of their inner jail so that you'll deal with them. Their breakout strategy comes in the form of flashbacks, nightmares, panic attacks, or less overwhelming but still intense and pervasive feelings of anxiety, shame, or desperation. So I really like this part too, that like the exiles um, even like they're not only triggered by world, life experiences, but they also, in and of themselves, are actively trying to break out past the protector because they know that their resolution would lead to greater peace and satisfaction with life, right? So they come in flashbacks, they come in nightmares or dreams. They give us panic attacks, and then this sort of like undercurrent. Have you ever had a day where you like everything actually looks very nice, but you're like, I don't know, something's wrong, like I just don't feel right? That can be a part, just being like, hey, since everything's fine and it looks like you have the capacity, can you pay attention to me and can we work some things out that I've been, needing to tell you? These exiles often, like if we have really strong protectors and we have like pretty much no sense of safety, it will hear less from our exiles. And what can actually be confusing is that when we do something like nervous system work or we leave a relationship that was really scary for us, or we leave a job that was scary for us, like things get better in the environment, we can often see an uptick in the breakout strategy of the exile, right? The exile gets louder, and we're like, wait, I just worked really hard to make stuff better in my life, and I'm feeling a little more distraught, like in my inner world. And it can feel like maybe you regressed or like you've done something wrong. And what I like to remind folks is that it's just an indication that you've increased your capacity. And so these exiles are like, hey, it looks like you're available. Can we hang out and talk now? It's kind of like how often kids will be like busy, busy, busy all day. And their like parent wants to hang out with them or the parent wants to hug them or cuddle them. And they're like, I've got things to do. And then in the middle of the night, when the parent has nothing going on and there's nothing else exciting, the kid will come in and be like, I'm scared of this and I'm worried about this and I want you to hold me all night and read to me. So it's kind of like that. It's not a sign that you're regressing. It's actually a sign that you have more capacity to take care of these parts and that they're aware of that. Okay, so it is to escape the bad feelings generated by the exile states. Other parts of you develop an arsenal of distracting activities to be used as needed. You feel the urge to get drunk, or you abruptly go numb and find yourself feeling confused and flat. If those efforts don't work, you may be both comforted and terrified by thoughts of suicide. If you qualify for the borderline personality disorder diagnosis, it's likely that you also have two sets of protective parts that specialize in handling relationships, the recruiters and the distrusters. And I love this part. This is really helpful if you're a person who has struggled with what maybe people have called disorganized attachment style. Um, okay. Um, okay, perfect. I paused. Sorry, I had that person who I thought was a no-show actually had stuff going on. Okay, great, good. That worked out. Um, okay, great. So, um, okay. So where was it? Oh yeah. If you are a person who someone has said you have a disorganized attachment style, um, like you have both anxious and avoidant attachment, which means maybe you like push people away as soon as they get close to you, or you like are desperately wanting someone who is totally unavailable for you. And if you have like both of those going on, it can be called disorganized, which also has a stigma around it and is like the most unhealthy of the attachment styles or something. Every time I've taken an attachment style quiz, I've come out disorganized. What are you going to do? Um, so, what can be nice is that this framework doesn't stigmatize it. It just explains it, which is, I love IFS for that reason. It just totally depathologizes all of the stuff that humans do that we get so much crap about and then we feel ashamed about. It all makes sense. Okay, so I love this metaphor that he gives about kids in a house. Okay, suppose your mind were a house with lots of children and no parents. The younger children are badly hurt and needy, and the older ones, overwhelmed with the task of caring for them, have locked them in the basement. Some of these older ones desperately want to find a grown up to take care of these basement orphans. They are the recruiters. They search for likely prospects, therapists, spouses, acquaintances, and make use of your charm to recruit those people into the role of redeemer. However, these recruiter parts share with your exiles a sense that you're basically worthless, that as soon as people see how vile you are, they'll bolt. They believe you have to prove yourself special in some way or manipulate people so they'll continue to play the redeemer role. The recruiters also believe that caring for your exiles is a full time job, so they try to invade the life of whomever they target. Among the older kids in this house of your mind is a faction that tries to protect the basement kids in a different way by trusting no one and keeping them away from people who might falsely raise their hopes of liberation. So the first one is the like obsessed, I want you so desperately. And this one is the I'm anxious, I think I want you to get away. These protectors have seen in the past what happens when the exiles attach too strongly to a potential redeemer. The exiles become infatuated with the supposed redeemer, who inevitably lets them down by never helping enough, or even by becoming repulsed by their neediness. The protectors have seen how the Redeemer's distaste and rejection devastates the basement children. So these big brothers or big siblings make sure you remain isolated, detached, completely engrossed in work, and emotionally unavailable. This is like what happens when you end up being told you're too much, right? They remind you that the Redeemers flee because you're truly repulsive, and that if others are allowed to get close enough to see you as you really are, they'll be disgusted too. Whenever your recruiters override the distrusters and succeed in getting you close to someone, these distrusting protectors watch that person's every move for signs that the person is false and dangerous. So if someone actually does want to hang out with you, then you start being like, there must be something wrong with them. They scan everything about your therapist for instance, from his taste in clothes and office furniture to perceived shifts in his mood or lengths of his vacation. They then use these imperfections as evidence that he doesn't really care or is incompetent, especially if he ever does anything that reminds you of your perpetrator. If your therapist uses a similar phrase or wears a similar shirt, he becomes your stepfather. So your therapist innocently enters the house of your mind and quickly finds himself caught in the crossfire between these sets of projectors. One set will do almost anything to get him to stay, and the other set will do almost anything to get him kicked out. If the therapist lasts long enough, he'll be subjected to the suffocating needs of your basement children and exposed to the disturbing methods the older children use to keep them contained. A therapist unprepared for this inner war or untrained in approaching these various internal factions will become embroiled in endless battles. So I love this description because it just gives a lot of compassion and recognition to what these protectors are trying to do. They're sincere, they're not stupid, and they're not wrong. They are creative and um, fiercely um, protective of you and want to help you, even though it might look like they're maybe people might use words like self-sabotage. And I love that this understanding or framework helps us to realize they're not self-saboteurs. They're protectors. These parts are really loving us and trying to help us. And they are just confused about what is actually helpful because they're stuck in the old reality from childhood where we had less resources and less cognitive. Uh, possibilities, right? Our brains were less developed. We had less experience. We had no ability to go out and get a job and pay our own bills and live on our own and choose who we spend time with, all of these things. So, through understanding them as, just well-intentioned but confused parts, we can get to know them, take care of them, let them get to know that part of, well, not the part of us, but the true us, that original face, that self us, who is, you know, an adult who's has unconditional love for all of these parts, who can take care of them, who can make sure that they don't get back into a situation where they're going to be, hurt, that can remove them from situations when they do get hurt, all of these good things. So it's a really nice perspective if you're a person who has been told that you have borderline, or if you're a person who has been told that you have borderline characteristics. Um, it could be interesting for you to think about these protectors, maybe connect with a coach or a therapist who has experience with internal family systems, see if this is something that resonates for you. And just, at the very least, if it feels good, just to invite in this idea that this is not a pathology. This is actually a really beautiful, genius um, system that is trying to take care of you. And it makes sense if you feel a little like it hasn't worked great and you'd like something different. Um, the dialectical behavioral therapy word dialectic is holding two opposing truths, and the core of dialectical behavioral therapy is um, this is how it is, and I'd like it to change. So it doesn't have as a core component like I'm bad or wrong for it being the way it is. Like this makes sense. I make sense that I got to develop these protectors and that things got a little confusing as a result. And I'd like to see if I can take better care of my exiles, my protectors, and have a little bit more peace in my life as a result. Okay, I'll put the links in the description. Lots of love.